Funding for Off 90 is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.
Cruising your way on this episode of Off 90. We meet up with a married couple who are both artists. We tour a newspaper in Blooming Prairie. And we visit with a writer who wrote about growing up in a small town in Minnesota. It's all just ahead, Off 90. Hi, I'm Barbara Keith. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Off 90. It's been said that married couples should have separate checking accounts. Married artists Judy and Tom have separate studios on their property in rural Northfield. Judy Saye-Willis is a fiber artist, and her husband Tom is a potter. We talked to them about what it's like living as artists under the same roof.
What I'm going to dye in here today, I'm going to dye this scarf. These were all done with onion skins out of this bag.
I'm Tom Willis, and I'm a potter.
I'm Judy Saye-Willis, and I'm a textile artist.
We met at the racetrack in Brainerd, working sports car races.
I work corners, and the corner workers are the ones when you see a race, well, I don't know, do they still have flaggers in the corner?
As far as being an artist, I didn't know I was an artist for another almost 20 years.
I had always done some textile-related work, most of my life.
I watched my folks retire and move to Florida with nothing to do. And I said, I have to do something in retirement. So I took an art class at age 55 with a bunch of 15-year-olds that knew how to throw pots. And I certainly didn't. But I fell in love with pottery, and I've been doing it ever since.
What I'm going to dye in here today, I'm going to dye this scarf. I've used paste resist on it and this screen. And I've laid the screen out and used a squeegee and scraped the paste through it. It's dried.
I've been throwing for about the last 3 weeks. I've got all of the pots thrown, trimmed, bisque fired, which is the first firing in a onset of firings that you do for clay. And now I'm glazing pots today and loading the kiln. By spraying them, I can change the thickness of the glaze on the pot. By changing the thickness of the glaze in the pot, I can give a different color or a different texture. So I can get more variety out of it than just dipping it into a pot.
I've been in textiles, but the natural dye part of it is within the last 4 or 5 years. And I think one of the things that really impressed me is the instructor that I took my first classes from. He was a botanist, chemist type of person. And the way he approached it kind of served as the way I think. I was able to go and study with him in France.
I physically built the studio myself and physically built this kiln. I didn't pour the concrete, but that's the only thing I didn't do. It's a real tactile coordination art thing. You also are looking at shape and volume and all the other things, but yet you have to do it with your hands. You can't stop and say, well, let's see, if I add a little more blue here, I think it'll look better. No, you have to do the whole thing in one operation to have it done.
And when we built the garage, we just decided that we could make it a little bit bigger and put my studio across the back of it. That's some of the things I'm going to dye. They've been soaking, so they're nice and wet. I'm going to get the middle part of this scarf wet before I put it into the indigo vat. I'm going to put this in so this drops down. It's 25 after. I'll probably leave this in for maybe 4 minutes. Those are 12 foot high, 45 inches wide. Shibori is a Japanese resist technique. It's stitching and clamping, but those were stitched.
I think it's a definite advantage that we're both artists, because if I want to buy a toy in my studio, I know that she's going to buy a toy in her studio, but we don't even talk about it. We don't talk about each other's art. If somebody asks, if one of us asks the other one, we'll give an honest opinion. When I go to Judy's studio or she comes to mine, we always knock on the door. And that sounds strange, but if you're in the middle concentrating on something, a knock isn't that disturbing. But if all of a sudden somebody's standing behind you that you didn't know was there, it can ruin a pot.
Well, and over here I've got some avocado pits they're pretty dried. Pomegranate skins. We did that last week. That was kind of a pale yellow-green.
To begin with, she was doing beads, some beadwork and some other things back and forth. But when she got into natural dyes, she's studying as hard as I am right now on combinations and techniques and everything else.
That's where the paste resist was. These designs, as it dries, will be more predominant because it's pretty much white, surrounded by a pale blue. I hope to continue to do the research and develop more techniques that people can use with natural dyes and probably publish something.
What I'm going to do in the future is make pots and experiment. One of these days I won't be able to pick up a 25-pound bag of clay, so I'll cut it in half and use a 12.5-pound bag of clay. I mean, I just gonna keep doing it until they cart me away.
The Steele County Times is a newspaper serving Blooming Prairie and Steele County. It's been around since 1893. We talked to the paper's owner, Rick Bustler. He told us what it takes for a newspaper to not only survive, but to grow in our current economy.
It's kind of been a myth out there is that newspapers are dying. And that certainly is not the case, at least here in Blooming Prairie and Steele County. I'm Rick Bustler, the publisher of the Steele County Times in Blooming Prairie, and also publisher of the news enterprise out of West Concord. Well, I started out actually when I was in high school, back in 8th grade in my hometown. Started out as a photographer and covered sporting events and took pictures at different community events. And all throughout high school, I kind of worked my way up after I did a year or two of photography. Then I got into writing, started writing sports stories and news stories and feature stories. And by the time I graduated, 12th grade, I was the assistant editor of the paper. And I had pretty much done everything. I had been out selling ads, I had laid out the paper, the layout and design, I had created ads, done all the writing, photography, you name it. I pretty much did it all back in my hometown. So that's where I really developed my interest in newspaper work. Actually, I had gotten out of the journalism profession for a while, and here about 5 years ago, I decided I wanted to get back into it. And I actually was looking around at different newspapers and found that at the time, Blooming Prairie Times was for sale, and purchased that newspaper 5 years ago in November of 2009.
May I have your attention, please? The Steele County Times press run is now beginning.
We print our newspaper at the Post Bulletin in Rochester, and then they actually deliver it to the community, to Blooming Prairie, every Tuesday afternoon. We're predominantly mail delivered. Our paper goes out through the U.S. Postal Service. We do also make our paper available on local newsstands in pretty much every community in the county. We've grown astronomically. It's been, beyond my wildest expectations in terms of the growth that we've experienced. In the last 5 years, we've doubled and actually come close to tripling our circulation, our readership. During that 5-year period, we expanded into a countywide newspaper. We used to just be covering Blooming Prairie, and basically it was the Blooming Prairie community newspaper. And 3 years ago, I expanded it to cover the entire county of Steele County. And that has been given us a lot of room to grow and to, experience the type of growth that we've been receiving.
So let's say somebody comes in and gives us an entry each week, we'll hand it out for you.
Okay.
So all it costs you is the ad. We pay for the actual gift card.
So besides the circulation growth, our sales have skyrocketed. We've won a lot of national and state awards. The paper had never won any awards before, so when I first took over, I think I had 4 staff members, one of which was full-time. And now, 5 years later, we've grown to 12. And I think with the exception of 1 or 2 of those, all of them are full-time. The paper itself has grown. When I took over in November of 2009, we were running about 14 pages a week. And this most recent issue that we put out, we had 40 pages in 4 sections. One thing that I think has been kind of a known around the industry is that daily newspapers have suffered. They have kind of taken it on the chin. A lot of them have cut back. Some have gone out of business. They've been laying off people over the course of the last 10, 15 years. So, the economic times have been brutal to a lot of daily newspapers. But the thing that we have found is that your smaller papers in the small towns, your community newspapers are thriving. Well, I think one of the biggest things is we have a niche that nobody else has. We are 100% local news, community news. We like to look at ourselves as the hometown news. We give that kind of news, and there aren't any other publications out there that do that. So I think as long as you're able to have that, you're going to find that smaller newspapers, community newspapers, are going to thrive. So this is our most recent issue of the now Steele County Times, which we just did a name change here, and I did a front page story kind of explaining the name change. We also did a story on that car seat, the person that was burned in a car seat with the car seat heater. The story starts on the front page and then continues inside on 2 full pages inside. And then we also have a picture of a Veterans Day, and then we have Citizens of the Year that were recognized in Blooming Prairie. So we try and offer a mixture of news that pertains to people all over the county in Steele County. Up until this point, we've had one person that's been primarily responsible for sports coverage. Lamar Nelson has been with us for, I think it's 22 years now. He's retired and was an educator in Blooming Prairie for many years. And once he retired from education, he came to work at the newspaper and has been here ever since. And Lamar just celebrated his 82nd birthday. So he's been very faithful to the community and very faithful to our newspaper, and people love him. So Lamar usually goes to all the Blooming Prairie games, especially the home games. So I always have to send one of our other staff members to the games to get the photographs. And usually Alan Van Ormer, who's our managing editor, will go to the games and take the pictures. So we've needed to kind of find a way to cover more outside of Blooming Prairie, and by adding a sports editor, that'll allow us to go into some of the other school districts in our area to cover more sports. You know, papers will see marginal growth, they'll see a little bit of growth, but they don't see the giant growth like we've experienced. And you know, that probably isn't going to continue forever. One of the challenges that we have faced in our expansion project here over the last 5 years is the Blooming Prairie people might feel a little slighted when you're growing and getting bigger, that they're losing their identity of the old Blooming Prairie times. But I guess the thing that I like to remind people is that long term, long range, if you want a newspaper that's going to be servicing your community, we have to look at growing and we have to look at expanding outside of Blooming Prairie, because it's not going to survive just by itself as a Blooming Prairie paper forever. And a lot of communities have seen that. A lot of their papers have folded or, you know, gone by the wayside over the years. I think it's kind of nice to have a locally owned paper. And I know some communities around here that have had their local papers bought out by bigger corporations, and they're not happy with them at all. There's approximately 350 newspapers in Minnesota. We're hoping that we can, you know, keep the paper going for many years to come.
Families in the United States have adopted more than 100,000 children from South Korea since 1953. As one of those adopted children, Joel Peterson shares his unique perspective in his book, Dreams of My Mothers. We visited with Joel to find out about the cultures of these two very different countries and the mothers they provided. These women, each in her own way, had a profound influence on Joel's life and his ultimate quest for self-identity.
Most of us, or maybe many of us, never feel that we ever get to know our mothers as people because we knew them as this institution called mom. And so I thought if I wrote a book about two women who were mothers, but also were portrayed as real people who had a journey and they were linked through a unique thing that is known as international adoption, which is a very rare thing, but contained within it is every human passion, drive, hope, dream, love that touches all of us in all parts of our lives. I'm Joel Peterson, and I'm an author. I wrote Dreams of My Mothers, which is categorized as biographical fiction. You know, the book deals with themes where, you know, based on events in my life. Well, you know, I was born to a third world prostitute, impregnated by an American GI. She had a third grade education. She lived in the margins of society. If you want to sort of think of what her life was like, think of, and not to pick on any one place or any one time, but think of, say, America 1926, Selma, Alabama, and a poor, uneducated, single white woman with a half-black child. How would she have been treated? How would he have been treated? And that was the basis and the start of my life, you know. And so those are things that you can't and you shouldn't sugarcoat. And I also shared that, you know, it's traumatic. Think of if you are 6 years old and your mother tells you, I'm sending you away. I'm not going to be your mother anymore. You're going to have a new family. And you're like, what the heck does that mean? How does that work? And not here, but you're going to be sent somewhere far away to people who don't look like you, don't speak your language, and you can kind of think of what that might have been. You cannot understand maybe the joys and the triumphs of life unless you are willing to go ahead and starkly see the anti-joys and the anti-triumphs of life. America is changing, the face of America is changing. We are still struggling with who is American, what does America look like? And that's partly what I wrote my book about, is to put front and center some of those kind of issues and dialogue. Of the, somewhere, nobody knows for certain, 150 to 200,000 Korean children that have been adopted out of Korea, the vast majority were sent to the United States. Every child deserves to have a home, to have parents, to have every opportunity to be loved and cherished. So adoption and international adoption, and often what they call transracial adoption, where you have parents of one race adopting children from another race, is quite polarizing. A lot of strong feelings on many sides of that, and I understand and completely validate those feelings. But what we know is this: adoption is still one of the most successful human social interventions ever invented. The Minnesota that I grew up in does still exist in many, many ways. I go back to my hometown of St. Peter, Minnesota, and it is remarkably the same. I think it's added maybe 1 or 2 more traffic lights, so maybe there's 4 total in the town. People still know each other. People still assume the best of each other, and I think Minnesota in general is like that. I was very fortunate that my mother and the character of Ellen Lindquist that I write about in the book, Dreams of My Mother's, passed on lessons saying, you know, the key thing is that we all judge ourselves by our intentions, but others can only judge you by your actions. So we may have intended, we may be very grateful, we intended to send that thank you note, but if you didn't send that thank you note, other people just think you're an ingrate. And the character of Ellen, modeled after my mother, passed on this lesson not so much in her words, but in her actions. She did these things. She lived her life a certain way. And that, I believe, is the thing that we can do as parents. Our children pay attention to us all the time. And so they look at our actions. We may talk to them a fraction of our lives, but they will know our actions. So it's really about living the example that you want them to live in their own life. I remember giving my dad for a Father's Day gift one time, I think I was 12, a little coffee cup. And it said on it, you can always tell a sweet, but you can't tell them much. And, you know, and there's a certain reputation among Scandinavians, among people who know Scandinavians, that Scandinavians are pretty stubborn, or maybe that it's hard to dissuade them once they have set themselves to a certain thing. You know, Scandinavians are known for a certain stoicism, but what again came through was that it wasn't so much in the words that I think the Scandinavian tradition is all about. The Scandinavian culture somewhat distrusts words. They look at actions. Ironically, I decided to put it into words in a book to try to capture that. So it's very gratifying to know that people are so vested that they care about these characters that I have helped bring to life in a book. The fact that those characters were based on real people, I'm not sure that people really care about the real people per se. Real people are very complex, and we don't have simple little beginning, ends, and wrapped up nice bow tie lives. We continue on until our lives don't. But those characters that are introduced in that book can go on and may have additional stories, which I hope maybe I can share with the readers in the future.
That's all for this episode. If you enjoy programs like Off 90, please show your support by becoming a member of KSMQ Public Television. Keep local programming vibrant in southern Minnesota. Give us a call at 507-481-2095 or 1-800-658-2539, or sign up online at ksmq.org. Thanks for watching. Join us next time, Off 90.
fired, it didn't look like it.
Yeah.
I'll do this.
Yeah, looks good.
There we go.
And let's see. Oh, you showed me that thing. Yeah, that was the.
Cone back.
Okay.
And the cone god. It's only what the cone gods give you.
Yeah.
I'll set that aside. I have some scarves in here and a tank top. The tank top was dyed in indigo. It's had one dip. I'm going to do that today, and I'm also going to dye a couple other scarves. One I'm over dyeing in indigo, and one has a little bit of shibori stitching in, and I'm going to dye both of those in that vat today.
Funding for Off 90 is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.